let's build a subclass. So I've been working around with some ideas for a Druidic subclass, a circle, and so I'd like to walk through this process of how I go about making a Druidic circle subclass. So the thing that I like to do when making subclasses is trying to fill niches that are generally unfilled in that class. The thing with Druids is that there isn't really, they do a lot of elemental stuff, but they don't really specialize in that. And then they also don't have any martial abilities, really. The Spore Druid is kind of a counterexample to that because you gain extra damage to weapon attacks, but that's like one thing, and you don't even get weapon proficiencies, so it doesn't really work. So with this one, let's fix that. Druids at second level get their first subclass features. Typically, on average, they get 2 features, so we'll do 2. We're going to base this roughly off of the Circle of Stars, where you gain a feature that grants you a spell, and then you gain a feature that grants you something that you can do with your wild shape instead of wild shaping. So for the first feature, let's call it, I don't know, Sacrament of the Elementalist. So you gain access to the Thaumaturgy spell because that has minor elemental powerful conjurations. And then since it's all about elementals, it would make sense that they would have tougher resistances to them. So let's give them absorb elements, and it doesn't count against the number of spells you can have prepared per day, and you can cast it an amount of times for free equal to your proficiency bonus per long rest. The second feature, we want to fill that niche of a martial ability. So let's call it a conduit of color. In your wanderings, you've crafted a weapon that you can use to defend the wild and conduct elemental power. So you can choose any weapon, simple or martial, that lacks the heavy property. A longbow is also a good option, and you can use it as a spellcasting focus for your druid spells. With the wild shape features for this, typically there are 3. So like for the Druid Circle of Blood that I made, there were 3. That was based off of the Druid Circle of Stars, where there were 3 wild shape features. So with this one, the first one, we want to lean into the weapon aspect to it. So let's call it like Armament of Elementalist or something like that. We'll work on that later. The names aren't really that important right now. When you awaken your Conduit of Color, as a bonus action, it lasts for 1 minute and you get 3 options. For the first one, you get Armament of the Elementalist. With this one, you add 1d4 elemental damage. You choose each time that you use this ability from a list of like acid, cold, fire, lightning, or poison damage. And it deals 1d4 damage of that type, and it counts as magical for overcoming resistances. For the second option, we want to do something that typically strays away from the other things that we've done, and druids don't really have a lot of passive buffing or resistances, so we could do something like Prism of Protection. With this one, your Conduit of Color weapon, it crystallizes and it refracts energy around your allies. As a reaction on your turn, after you awaken your conduit as a bonus action, you can grant one ally within 60 feet resistance to elemental damage as a reaction. For the third one, I really like curses, but there aren't a lot of curses in 5e. Like there's Hex, but Hex is really basic. There's Bestow Curse, which is kind of just like Hex, but like it costs a 3rd level spell slot, which is not that cool. So this one, let's call it like Curse of the Rainbow, because it's the circle of color and all color comes from a single source of white light. So with this one, as a bonus action, when you awaken your Conduit of Color and on subsequent turns while it's active, you can use a ranged spell attack against a target within 60 feet. And if you hit, it deals 1d4 plus your wisdom modifier in radiant damage, and they have to make a con save against your spell save DC. If they fail, they're blinded until the end of your next turn. That's pretty cool. And then going forward with that, each subclass feature at 6th level, you would gain a boost to your Conduit of Color. At 10th level, you would gain a boost. We could call those like Heightened Conduit or Masterful Conduit. And then the Capstone feature at 14th level is typically something that's different and strays away from those features, but has similar qualities. So this one, we could call it like Elemental Ascension or something like that. With this one, you're dealing a lot of elemental damage, so it makes sense that your resistances would be permanently improved against that. So you gain resistance to acid, cold, fire, lightning, and poison damage. And since one of the wild shape features, the Conduit of Color features, it's all about rainbows and light and refraction, let's throw in radiant damage to the resistances list too. And since you're dealing a lot of elemental damage at high levels, enemies typically have resistances to stuff like that. So let's just say that your attacks and spells that use those elemental types plus radiant ignore resistances. Now we have a subclass, the Circle of Color, and it's varied. It has different options for your wild shape use, which is something that's become more popular with Wizards of the Coast Druids in recent years, and it has some great variety. It has great options for martial abilities, it has cursing abilities, it has abjurative abilities so that you can protect your allies, and yeah, that's pretty much done.